Right now, there's a climate crisis, and as a planet, we aren't far from irreparable damage being done. You probably know this already, but why am I telling you as a motoring YouTuber? Well, transport is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally. 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK in 2021 were from the transport sector, which was more than any other industry. Vehicles on the road are the main culprit, with road transportation making up for 76.2% of transport emissions in the EU in 2021. This means that finding less polluting methods of transport is paramount to any possible climate turnaround before it's too late. This has led to support for electric vehicles as a more environmentally friendly means of road transport. With no emissions released while driving, they have been billed as the future of motoring and a potential solution to the climate crisis, with cars and vans making up for 68% of road transport greenhouse gas emissions. These vehicles have been the target of manufacturers, first as HDVs, and buses are less suited to electric power. So then, how green are EVs in comparison? This may seem like an obvious question, but it's more complex than you may think. While usage emissions are almost always lower, we have to look at lifetime emissions to get a full understanding of the environmental credentials of electric vehicles. One of the most groundbreaking investigations into this came from Volvo, who compared their electric car, the C40 Recharge, to the XC40. They are comparable cars with similar size and concepts. They found that the EV had lower emissions during manufacturing, excluding the production of lithium-ion batteries, as 1.4 tonnes of carbon dioxide or equivalents was released, whereas the XC40 caused 1.7 tonnes of emissions. The use phase, driving and refueling, produced the biggest difference in emissions, with the ICE vehicle emitting 43 tonnes of carbon dioxide and equivalent, and the C40 Recharge emitted just 24 tonnes. This was calculated using the global energy mix, which includes many non-renewable sources, as developing countries cannot afford to switch to more sustainable ways of generating electricity. The EU energy mix reduced use phase emissions to just 16 tonnes, while using wind electricity would release just 0.4 tonnes. Volvo also reported the end-of-life emissions, which is recycling and the removal of dangerous or valuable parts, were 0.1 tonnes less than the combustion car. All these differences resulted in lower lifetime emissions for the EV, with 50 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents emitted by the C40 Recharge using the global mix, compared with the XC40, which emitted 59 tonnes. Using the EU energy mix, the C40 Recharge emitted 42 tonnes, and if it used wind-generated electricity, a lifetime emission would be just 27 tonnes. These figures were calculated across 200,000 kilometres throughout the vehicle's lifetime. The lower usage emissions of the EV means that the break-even point of total emissions when comparing the two is at 49,000 kilometres when using the wind electricity, or 77,000 using the EU mix. Even the global electricity mix makes the point 110,000 kilometres, just over half the total mileage assumed. The report shows that across the world, using EVs can reduce lifetime emissions of vehicles and should reduce transport emissions. Other research articles corroborate Volvo's findings. Comparing electric vehicles with conventional vehicles and hybrids shows that emissions are significantly reduced per mile and over the lifetime of the vehicle as well. A Volkswagen Passat 2-litre TSI emits 49.6 tonnes of carbon dioxide and equivalent, and a Mercedes-Benz C300D emits 38.5 tonnes. Compared with a Tesla Model 3, this is extremely high. Across its lifetime, it emits just 17.5 tonnes of CO2e when using conventional electricity, i.e. fossil fuels, and using renewable fuel sources, it emits just 5.5 tonnes. The article concluded that electric vehicles have 89% lower life cycle emissions when using green electricity than a combustion engine vehicle. When using conventional electricity, the reduction is closer to 60%. EVs have not yet taken off outside the Western world, with the exception of China, as car buyers have lower budgets that EVs cannot yet meet. However, their popularity is rising in these countries, and concerns have been raised about how sustainable they will be, with electricity being more reliant on non-renewable sources. A study of EVs and other technologies in the Maghreb countries, more specifically Tunisia, Morocco and Algeria, found that well-to-wheel energy consumption from power generation to emissions whilst driving was significantly lower for battery electric vehicles, ranging from 140 to 170 megajoules per 100 kilometers in comparison to over 250 for diesel vehicles. This demonstrates that EVs can reduce usage emissions and energy demand in countries across the world, not just developed countries with less dependence on fossil fuels. A reduction in emissions is heavily reliant on energy sources though, as a hybrid Toyota Prius could be less polluting than an all-electric Chevrolet Bolt if the EV is charged on a coal-heavy grid. However, EVs are not all positive. Whilst they reduce emissions across their lifespan, production emissions are still very high, and there are ethical concerns surrounding lithium-ion batteries. Many emissions come during the production and refining of materials used and the batteries required. Volvo estimates that 7 tons of greenhouse gases were emitted due to the lithium-ion battery modules in production, as well as an extra 4 tons when compared with the internal combustion engine equivalent. They have concluded that if the battery is included in the production and refining of material stage, then the increase in carbon footprint is nearly 70%. Other estimates show it to be 59%, but both are alarmingly high. It was also found that lithium mining uses 50,000 gallons of water to extract 1 metric ton of metal. Countries like India rely on coal and other fossil fuels for the bulk of their energy, as does China. This means an EV transition wouldn't stop their reliance on fossil fuels. This could undermine EVs as being cleaner, more sustainable transport than combustion vehicles. China is expected to have 50% EV share of all vehicles by 2035, but carbon emissions will rise by 54.2%. Whilst this is less than if the fleet was entirely combustion powered, it suggests that EVs are not the best solution to the problem, and that a more sustainable method needs to be found for countries with less renewable electricity in their energy mix. The same article also analysed the effects of EV adoption across 26 major countries and found that carbon emissions would rise, despite 42.5% of vehicles being electric. Again, this was less than if all vehicles were powered by petrol or diesel, but it's still polluting. Global carbon emissions will continue rising until 2035, despite a worldwide 50% EV share, demonstrating they are not a short-term fix as previously suggested. This evidence suggests that to reduce carbon emissions, it will be more beneficial to transition towards renewable energy first, as fossil fuels producing electricity undermines the concept of EVs. This evidence also suggests that developing countries may be better suited to plug-in hybrids, as they're cheaper than EVs, will be more usable, as well as potentially less polluting. Emissions clearly depend on what type of energy is used, so EVs must be used alongside efforts to make energy more sustainable to have a real impact. So after all that, how green are EVs overall? There's no debate that they're more environmental over their lifespan, though this may be shorter due to the cost of replacing batteries. However, they aren't as eco-friendly as you'd think. If you own one for 5 years or less, it would probably be better for the planet to drive an efficient petrol or diesel car or a hybrid. Obviously, if you own it for longer and across multiple owners, it's probably better for the environment. Ultimately though, it depends on the energy mix, meaning electric vehicles aren't the simple and only solution to the climate crisis that people often think that they might be, and they are sometimes portrayed as.